This is Property Pursuits. It's our once a month live market update, unless you're not catching it live, in which case it is not live, and you are hearing a recording of it. But if you're here right now, then it's live, in real time, with no editing. So we do this once a month to give you guys an update on the market, what's happening, but really from the point of view of not, oh, here's all this economic data. We nail it down and say, this is how we're seeing it impact how long homes are sitting on the market. This is how we're seeing it impact our buyer strategies. This is how many people we've been able to help. And this is a success story that we have. And we try to give you homework every time, because who doesn't love homework? But also, homework that improves your finances is important. You might have noticed we have a guest today. Yay. Stephanie's here. Stephanie's an attorney at a local law firm. The slides are not moving. There we go. Stephanie, introduce yourself.
Hi, guys. My name is Stephanie Funk. I'm a partner at Viloria, Oliphant, Oster Aman. We're a full-service law firm here locally, a local firm. But my specialty is estate planning, probate and trust litigation, real property, kind of within that realm. So thanks for having me. I love in my next life, I'll be a realtor. I love houses. I love all the market stuff. So that and a party planner.
I've been to some of her parties, and I could say that would be a better. Well, no, you're pretty good at real estate too. You'd really have a tough time deciding. For the OG audience, Stephanie we were trying to figure out if she was a panelist on the very first Futurist Female or if it was the second one. But I really think it was the first one. When the Futurist Female launched during COVID and we weren't allowed to be around people, we definitely weren't allowed to sit this close to each other, so we did it on Zoom. But she and I go back.
Well, this is much better.
Yeah. The question we always ask our guests, which is, I already know the answer to yours, is a lot of times we have a realtor on. So far, that's all we've had is realtors, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And so we want to ask them, if they weren't a realtor, if they weren't in this business professionally, would they buy or sell real estate right now? So I'm going to ask you, in this market, with everything you know, would you buy or sell a house?
Absolutely. And I did. I bought and sold a house this year. So, yeah, absolutely. I think this is when you can make deals happen that you otherwise won't be able to make happen.
Sometimes I say things that I don't remember saying, and then when I hear them back, I'm like, wow, that's really inappropriate. So Stephanie and her husband sent me a question about something, and if the cost was appropriate. And do you want to know what I said?
What did she say?
I said, when you buy a mansion, you get mansion-sized problems.
And she was not kidding, folks. So if anybody's in the market for a new house and they want to chat, Shivani has my contact information.
Okay, moving on from me saying things that are not expected. One of the reasons we wanted to have Stephanie on was when it comes to trusts and wills and probate, a lot of the things you said that you're an expert in, people are confused. Like, it's common knowledge to have a will, but when is a will enough and when is it not?
Okay.
Specifically when it comes to real estate.
So the biggest misconception I see that everybody really needs to understand is if you have a will and nothing else except for a will, anything that is still owned in your individual name when you pass away will have to go through probate before it can pass to the beneficiaries that you've named in the will.
What's probate mean?
So probate is really just the court process where somebody is going to court, proving to a judge that, Stephanie Funk has passed away. She owned these assets and she wanted, me or this other person to have them. And while that sounds simple enough, I hope none of you ever have to be involved in a court proceeding, because courts, especially when it comes to civil matters, which these are because they're generally related to money, are incredibly slow. And it's a very expensive process. So best case scenario, what I'm seeing right now is probates that are straightforward. Nobody's fighting over anything. I mean, it's still taking us usually a minimum of about 10 months to get through a full probate. And that's just, the basics. And even then, we're still sometimes having to leave it open to deal with tax issues in the next calendar year. That's 10 months potentially that assets are tied up. They're not really benefiting anybody. There's going to be a several month period where somebody's having to keep the mortgage current if there's a house with a mortgage, the utilities on, because eventually you're going to sell this house and you do inspections and everything else. So those carrying costs add up really quickly and ultimately just reduce the net amount that's available there for the beneficiaries and the heirs. And then it's a court process. So it's still difficult for people to do on their own. And normally they have to hire an attorney to help get them through it. Otherwise, you see people taking, years, because every time you make a mistake, you're starting over and going back to the court and waiting 4 to 6 weeks for a hearing. And attorneys are entitled to charge a statutory fee, meaning we have laws that say this is what our government has determined to be reasonable. It's based off the gross value of the estate. So that's really, really important when you're dealing with real property. As we know, property prices are high. You're talking about basic entry-level condos at $300,000, right? And that's not taking into account the mortgage that has to be paid, the real estate commissions that are going to be paid to sell it, the closing costs. The attorney is entitled to charge 4% of the first $100,000, 3% of the second $100,000, and 2% after that up to $1 million, 1% after that. So it adds up really quickly anytime there's a house involved. So I think the misconception is, I'm not wealthy, I don't need a trust. I tell people, if you have a house, you really need to look at a trust. If you have minor children, which is a different conversation, you really need to look at a trust. It's not just for wealthy individuals. Real estate is by far the most difficult and usually most expensive asset to probate. So
if you own a house, you have kids, or you have assets of any nature, even if you don't think they're substantial, you need a trust. But then what's a will good for in the first place? Why do they exist?
Well, a will can serve a purpose. A will is better than nothing, okay? If you have nothing in place, then Nevada's default laws, we call them our intestate laws. Intestate just meaning someone died without a will or a trust, without legal documents in place. The intestate laws just direct what happens to your assets. There can be a lot of unintended consequences when that happens. Community property will generally default to a spouse. Separate property will go a combination between a spouse and, children. It basically is going to follow, who's the next of kin and then separate out based off who your next of kin is in your unique situation. But especially as we see people getting married older in life after they've acquired their own assets and separate property, second marriages, things like that, it's not uncommon that there may be a mix of both separate and community. And the house that you and your spouse live in and have lived in for decades, your kids may be entitled to a portion of that if it's something that is separate property to you. There may be people that are considered your next of kin that you don't want to inherit all of your hard-earned assets, right? People come to me all the time and say, well, I haven't spoken to a parent in X amount of years, or I don't like my sister, whatever. And they're shocked to learn that, well, your sister is your next of kin, and right now she's going to get everything, and she's going to be the one making life or death decisions for you if something happens. So a will, power of attorneys, all those other legal documents are the best way to ensure your wishes are down on paper and can be enforced by a court. But it's the balance then of, does it avoid probate? Do I need more? When people come to me and say, Stephanie, I just have, my retirement accounts and some money in the bank, they probably don't need a trust. They can put beneficiaries on all of those accounts. That's a way to make sure that that account is paid to someone immediately upon death without any type of court involvement. There is paperwork and other things involved, but it's not going to go through probate. So it's just that conversation and everybody's unique circumstances.
So you have to go to an attorney to have a will done properly?
You don't have to, okay? Ultimately...
That was my next question, is what attorney is letting someone do a will but then not doing the other things?
So you don't have to. At the end of the day, power of attorneys are statutory documents. You can find those in our statutes. There are, people can leave handwritten wills, but there are very specific legal requirements for a will to be valid, whether it's a handwritten holographic will, whether it's a formal will, done by an attorney. And the issue
a
is...
handwritten will could be legally...
Absolutely. There are certain requirements. Has to be dated, has to be signed by you, has to be in your handwriting. But where we see a lot of issues on our end is people, forget one of those requirements, or they try to do their own will and they have it notarized, but they don't have two separate witnesses. The witnesses didn't sign a self-proving affidavit. I mean, there's so many nuances that could really cause a lot of problems if it's not done correctly. Absolutely. I always recommend, if you're having legal work done, go to an attorney and do not go to a paralegal or a document preparer. They're not attorneys. They shouldn't be giving you legal advice. At that point, you might as well just be doing them yourself.
Fair enough. There's advice that I give people, and I want to see what you think. There's legal advice I give out of turn to people. No, it's not legal. It's even if you have a trust and a will, I think that you should, like, say you're a spouse who manages all the money, or you're a spouse who has separate bank accounts. I think that you should record a Loom video with the login to your retirement, to your crypto, to your bank accounts. This is how you pay the mortgage. This is where this insurance agent has access to these policies. You record a Loom video, it has your passwords, the logins, how to pay your bills. You put it on a flash drive and you put it in your safe so that if something happened to you during a super stressful time, people aren't waiting for the attorneys and all this shit to come in. They know how to access the thing. Like, your spouse would know, okay, this is how I pay the mortgage. I can just watch this video and get into everything I need.
So I have no idea what a Loom video is. So you're clearly much cooler and more advanced than I am. But
you have a video where I can see your bank login page and I can see your face in the corner walking me through.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think from a legal perspective, there's some technical issues with that. I don't think it's bad advice. I mean, I always tell my clients on a much more basic level, when they do their estate planning, they have their will, their trust, their power of attorneys. They have everything in a nice binder, right? That's your home base. That's where you're putting all the information you can to make your loved ones' lives easier when the time comes. Because we forget, at the end of the day, someone has just lost a loved one, a spouse, a parent, a sibling, a friend, a partner.
Under distress.
You lose your mind and you forget things. And even if it's, we've had 10 conversations about where my, spouse wanted their ashes scattered, in that moment, it's like, oh my God, I don't know what they wanted. Is that what they wanted? Am I misremembering that? So the more you can give them, the better. And then think about our parents, right? How many of us are having really, really detailed conversations with our parents about their finances? I'm extremely close with my mom. We probably talk way more about it than a lot of people. And I don't even know where some of this stuff is and who I need to call. So use that binder as your home base. Take the time to write up a contact list. These are the people I want you to contact, and this is how you get a hold of them. A password list. I mean, I can't remember my own passwords. Mm-hmm. So your passwords, your login information for various accounts, because so much is done online nowadays. You're not getting stuff in the mail anymore like we used to. So password lists, you can write letters, leave notes, do all of that stuff. So I generally think that's great advice because they do need that information. However, if somebody has a bank account and it's their separate bank account and you're not on their bank account, after they pass away, even if you had a power of attorney, for example, so you had the legal ability to access that account while someone was living as their agent, the power of attorney terminates upon death. And so you should not be accessing somebody else's bank account and using their money without the proper legal documents in place to protect yourself.
Okay, so then here's my question. Let's say I kick the bucket.
Okay.
And then Josh doesn't know the login to pay the Almanor mortgage and all that stuff. How long is it until the trust opens that stuff up for him and starts handling it?
I mean, it should be as quickly as having a death certificate. So once someone has a death certificate, they should be able to walk into the bank with the trust documents and the death certificate and pretty much immediately have access to the trust account.
So that you don't have to do anything illegal?
Correct.
But the key is the bank account needs to be in the trust. It can't be just in Shivani's name.
Correct. So you would have to have it in the trust for it to be a trust asset and the trustee to have control over it. A workaround that a lot of people do, because at the end of the day, banking's difficult, right? You have direct deposit, you have bill pay, all of these things. And some banks are easier to work with than others. People will name the trust as the beneficiary of the account so that the money can still get into the trust post-death. But, at the end of the day, that's why getting them that information one way or another is great.
Okay, so it wasn't totally bad.
No.
Just a little illegal. Okay, so then... and
it's probably a victimless crime, so you're okay.
This is a trick question now, is... when you go to take title, you will have these choices. So when you buy a house, you take title in a certain way, and this is how it's recorded, the ownership of the home. And typically you take it like Sandy would take it as a single woman. Or if you're married, you take it as husband and wife as joint tenants. But then there's these options with community right of survivorship and single woman versus unmarried woman. And all. Does it matter how you vest the title of your house?
Absolutely. So in certain situations, yes, absolutely. And I find myself with clients all the time wondering how this happened. I think it's the most important for either married couples or people buying property together. When you have multiple owners on a property, vesting is very, very important because there are kind of the magic buzzwords, right, that people are looking for, but carry a lot of meaning with them. Joint tenants with right of survivorship means when someone passes away, their portion of that property is going to automatically pass to the other joint owners who survived them. If
you just do as joint tenants without right of survivorship, what happens?
Well, joint tenants is kind of that magic term that carries with it right of survivorship.
Okay.
Where we see a lot of issues on the probate side of things is when people take title as husband and wife, and they don't have husband and wife as, joint tenants or husband and wife with right of survivorship, just husband and wife.
I've got a question in chat.
Okay.
They asked, or Julie asked, I am the trustee for a couple of different family members, none of whom live in Nevada, and my designated trustees don't live in Nevada, although I do. What are the potential challenges to be prepared for when that time comes?
Can we pause before you answer and say no one ever asks any questions? But when I said I thought we were going to have more people this time, Stephanie's like, people like to talk to attorneys.
Love that free legal advice, which I'm happy to give you. So I honestly don't know that it creates a ton of complications nowadays. I mean, especially post-COVID, right? We do everything online. We do everything remotely. Yes, at some point, you're going to have to travel to wherever the assets are and probably, go through personal property and kind of do some things in person. But for the most part, I mean, we buy and sell houses remotely nowadays. We can access bank accounts remotely. I think there's very little you actually have to be in person to do. And you can outsource and hire people to do so many things. I think it becomes especially important, though, in that scenario when you're not local, to work with great partners, work with the real estate agent that is going to help you coordinate the junk remover, the house cleaner, the painter. They're going to have the contacts that you're going to need to get your job done efficiently.
Can you go back to husband and wife?
Yeah. So going back to the vesting, husband and wife by itself does not carry a right of survivorship. And unfortunately, I've done many probates where somebody comes to me because spouse passed away. They had, title as husband and wife jointly together, but not with right of survivorship. They do nothing for many years. And then at some point they go to sell the property, and again, how it gets this far, I will never understand, but they've hired a real estate agent. Nobody checked the title or vesting. They've accepted a contract, and now they're in escrow. And it's the eve of closing, and the underwriter comes back and says, well, they don't have clear title because their spouse is still on title and they've passed, and you need to go to probate court. right? And now we're in this probate situation where you're
This is giving me anxiety.
yeah, you're risking breach of contract with a buyer who has already sold their house, et cetera. It gets very messy, very urgent, and stressful for everybody. So yes, vesting matters. If you want it to pass to your joint owner, you have to have either joint tenancy or right of survivorship language. If you don't, and something you really need to think about, if you're buying properties with partners, whether it's a romantic partner or a business partner, do you want your share of that property to pass to somebody if you unexpectedly pass away? Or do you want to be able to redirect it through your will or your trust or your estate planning to your loved ones, your beneficiaries, whoever that may be?
Yeah.
Then you're looking at tenants in common, right? And if you're tenants in common, then you can start owning unequal shares. So maybe, you own different percentages based off how much you're contributing to the down payment, et cetera. So
That's smart.
something that's, a lot of people probably don't know about vesting. If you do buy something with someone jointly as a joint tenant, you can always sever the joint tenancy. So if you sever the joint tenancy, it then reverts to a 50-50 tenants in common ownership, and now you own separate shares. So vesting is really, really important.
But if you're husband and wife, you should have a trust, and you should be taking title in your trust.
Absolutely.
Okay. So
If you're an individual, you should have a trust. I mean, arguably, it's more important for unmarried individuals because you don't have that person for things that you own jointly with, and they automatically just pass to that person, right? You've got to have a plan in place.
Sandy, when you're in Encompass and you're checking the vesting box,
Yeah.
which box do you check?
With right of survivorship.
Me too.
Yeah, always.
We're such good loaners. I was going to say, because you said sometimes we don't even know how this happened, and I've literally never seen a title where it was just husband and wife where we didn't have the next part. Our docs team would stop us and say, how are you drawing this?
That's because your guys are the best.
Speaking of, because we're the best, you could follow us online. I didn't put Stephanie's Instagram because it's her personal, so I put your website. I hope that was the right choice.
Absolutely.
But you don't have to wait for this monthly webinar to stay in the loop with us. We put out content almost daily to keep you guys in the loop of what's happening, and if you follow us on Instagram, you'll be in the loop. Okay, so now let's talk about, because as you mentioned, housing is not cheap, and affordability is a bit of an issue, which we talk about here all the time. A lot of times people are buying a house not just with a romantic partner, but with a friend, or they're investing with a partner on real estate. How are cohabitation agreements helpful? And then also, where do you run into it's not bulletproof?
Well, I think just off the bat, nothing you ever do is perfect or completely bulletproof. I mean, people come to me, we do estate plans, they say, well, nobody can ever challenge us, right? And I'm like, no, they can. I mean, I can't stop someone from challenging something in court, regardless of how frivolous it is. I mean, there may be consequences for their actions, but that's still a legal right they have under our judicial system. So when are cohabitation agreements important? I think
Should we explain what one is?
Yeah, so basically a cohabitation agreement is when two people who are owning property together are entering into a contract with each other related to that property and usually the stuff in it, the personal property, because we have all kinds of issues, right? I mean, the ownership portion, frankly, may be the easiest. I mean, you can take it as tenants in common, you define how much each person owns. What really gets messy a lot of times, though, is the stuff that goes in the house, right? Well, I bought the couch, I bought the table, we bought the 75-inch TV together, and then who gets what when somebody wants to move out or the relationship, ends, if it's regardless of the type of relationship. Same thing. If someone moves out and doesn't want to live there, does the other person get to stay? Are they going to be in a situation where they're forced to sell? And our court system is not set up for this type of situation. Okay, you have family court, which is set up for legally married couples who are getting divorced or people with children together and custody issues. Family court does not have jurisdiction over two people who basically entered into a business relationship with each other and is now in a dispute. right? Those situations are under the general jurisdiction court, which is our kind of business court, right? Our civil stuff and criminal. But really, at the end of the day, your business partners fighting over money. So now you're in general jurisdiction court. Again, not fast, not cheap. It's a really slow, difficult process that's nearly impossible for you to handle on your own. And so then people come to, speak with me about it, and I have to explain these realities of how much money they're going to spend and how much time they're going to spend fighting over the couch and the TV and the pots and pans. And at that point, you can just go buy all new stuff. But the bigger issue that we see, and where cohabitation agreements, I think I've seen them work out really well, is delineating who gets the house and what's the process, right? Does one person get a first right of refusal to buy the other person out? How long do they have to do that? I mean, you can define all of those terms in advance so that if something happens, it's really easy, it's clean, and it's clear. This is the process we've agreed to, and this is what's going to happen. And I've drafted them. I've seen them, used on the other end. And when they're done well, it's a great tool to have in place.
As a mortgage advisor, I tell people to get one because I don't think that you should not buy just because you need a partner to buy with you. I think I've seen couples who were serious and committed and renting for 10 years. And that was a wasted opportunity. They could have bought something, but they didn't want to buy before they were married. So I think in today's day and age, buying a house with someone who's not your spouse is a reality. And it's oftentimes a smart financial decision. But I think a mortgage is more of a commitment than marriage, because you can get out of a marriage with a divorce, but a mortgage is going to require like somebody being refinanced off, ownership transferring, or you guys staying connected in this way until a solution arises. But as an aspiring or as a student therapist, I also think a cohabitation agreement could be really healthy for your relationship, because worst case, people don't want to talk about breaking up. But if you have outlined certain things, it gives both of you a peace of mind that could remove some tension in the relationship.
Absolutely.
Sandy, what's going to happen this month?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk about the Fed is going to cut interest rates this month. So they're meeting on the 17th and 18th of this month, and likely to cut 25 to 50 bips, which is 1/4 to 0.5%. So everyone's been asking, okay, what should I do? Should I wait to refinance or buy or do my debt consolidation? So I wanted to go over, okay, does the Fed funds rate actually, and of course I put a graph in.
She always has a graph.
So I wanted to go over, does the Fed funds rate actually track with mortgage rates? So you can see here, this red line is the Fed funds rate, and it's very stair-steppy because they say, okay, we're going to cut, and then they do, or they increase it, and then they do, and that's what it is. Mortgage rates are those blue and green ones, and so you can see that they do not go directly with the Fed funds rate. They track more closely with the 10-year Treasury, which is that black line. So,
could you send me this graph?
Yeah. So what's really interesting, I kind of wanted to just briefly touch on how mortgage rates are priced so that you can know kind of what economic data we're looking at to see what's going to likely happen with mortgage rates. So the 10-year Treasury and mortgage rates track closely together because investors are looking at these as investments. So when I say investors, this could be like your 401k manager, for example. So you could be investing in other people's mortgages or in treasury bonds and basically lending money to the government. So these are considered pretty stable investments. And so the investment managers are looking for good rates of return, stability, and then you as home buyers are looking for low rates of return. So it's kind of this dance, and that's why one of the things we look at is bond auctions. How many investors are investing in these bonds or mortgage-backed securities? Because when we have more people investing, there's more demand, that brings mortgage rates down. So it's kind of just this dance here on that front.
Or demand for mortgage bonds and mortgage-backed securities means better interest rates for the buyer.
Yes, definitely. So it's kind of a complicated topic, but what actually does move interest rates? So The Fed policy can definitely impact interest rates, and that can be more so than just adjusting the Fed funds rate. It can be how many mortgage-backed securities is the Fed buying.
What are they keeping on their balance sheet?
Exactly, because they can invest in mortgage-backed securities to stimulate the housing market, bring rates down, or they can let these roll off of their balance sheet, which has the opposite effect. So that actual policy has an impact, and just when they make an announcement or have a meeting and like give clues to what they're going to do, that will also impact mortgage rates.
Or if they print money, which is inflationary.
Yes, which brings me into inflation. So the other thing is inflation. So we've seen mortgage rates higher than, so right, we have the 10-year treasury, and then we have mortgage rates are generally a little bit higher because they're considered slightly riskier than lending money to the government. Part of this spread, or the difference between the two, has been this like fear of inflation and what's going to happen with the economy. So we've seen that come down, but that's really something.
At one point last year, they said there was like 300 basis points built in there of fear, of like a difference of how much higher the 30-year treasury note was than the 10-year.
Yeah, which is pretty abnormal. Yeah, and we've seen that mostly subside. So, but inflation, predictions of inflation will all impact interest rates, and that's why the jobs number is something that we're definitely looking at. And then I'll circle back to that real quick, but geopolitics is another thing. So world events can quickly change mortgage rates. We saw that with COVID. We saw that like when wars get announced, it's really sad, but then mortgage rates get better because people are like, oh, we'll just take our money out of the stock market and invest in bonds. And so then we see the flooding to the safer investments and the improvement in mortgage rates. So the deal with the Fed cutting interest rates is that it's already priced into the market mostly. So because the Fed, there's all this anticipation that they're going to cut rates, there are actually probability sheets that get put out that say what the Fed's likely to do.
25 bips is a bet at like 100% right now in the Fed futures market, right?
But then it's possible it'll be a 50, especially with the job numbers we've been getting this week. So we'll see. I do think if we do get the 50, that might help us more. But basically, so the job opening, the JOLTS report, job opening and labor turnover survey. So we were expecting it to go from 8.18 million to 8.1, but today they also revised it from 8.1 to 7.9. So all of these numbers, basically we saw a 6% decline recently in this report, which basically shows us that the hiring, the job openings, they're all trending downward.
So the labor market is not as strong.
Right. So that bodes well for inflation. So that's another reason that the Fed's more likely to cut rates, because of their dual mandate of keeping inflation under control and also keeping a healthy jobs market. So that was a lot of information on interest rates. Basically, what should you do with this information? And it's not wait until September 17th or 18th. Your locking strategy might be dependent on what kind of economic reports are coming out. We're constantly monitoring that to get you guys the best interest rate possible. But really, right now, the action steps are monitor for your personal refinance and figure out what the winning strategy is in any market with any interest rate. How can we take this information, negotiate with the seller, put a deal together with really good terms?
So someday we'll stop talking about the NAR lawsuit, but
Not today.
it's not today because there's an attorney here. So if you follow anything I say about this, well, actually, it wasn't me who initially said this, okay? It was Ryan Serhant. Do you know who he is?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we asked Ryan.
I told you in my next life, real estate agents. So I had to watch all the real estate agent shows.
$1 million listing. So we asked Ryan in November, right after the news came out. We're like, what do you think happens now? And before answering the question, he went on this wild tangent on the attorneys and what they're going to benefit from this lawsuit. And he's like, they're coming after me and my 3% commission. But they're going to make like 20% commission on this lawsuit. And he actually said we should look up the animal porn that these attorneys are watching and expose them for the assholes that they are. Because he said that it's not going to benefit the consumer. I disagree now, because now we're into this, right? And also, I have been in a point of following Dodd-Frank, lending became much more transparent. And there was a lot more disclosure that had to happen. And it didn't actually do anything for the consumer unless they land in the hands of a lender who's going to offer all that transparency back to them and educate them and explain exactly, this is what I get paid. This is the money that comes directly to me. This is how I'm compensated. This is the money that is up to you. For example, I can explain clearly to a client that I will get paid when their loan is sold. That's where my commission comes from. The processing and underwriting fee is paid to my company so that we can handle and facilitate the loan. And the points you pay or do not pay do not come to me. So I have no motivation for you to pay points or not pay points. It all comes down to the numbers and a total cost analysis on if this benefits you. That's the explanation I have to give. Realtors didn't have to give that explanation before. And I think that could be a huge benefit to the consumer in that they now have to understand where the money went. Because for everyone watching, you may or may not understand, but the buyer did always pay the realtor's commission because the buyer bought the house for $400,000 and the realtor's commission was paid for both sides from that $400,000 before the seller received their proceeds. But they didn't have it as a hard expense at closing. It was financed. They put their 5% down and then they paid their closing costs, and the commissions paid to the realtor were financed. They paid them over 30 years. Now, and it was a hard cost to the seller. It directly reduced the amount of money they got from the sale of their property. So the buyer and the seller paid it, essentially. Now it could still be that way, but attorneys did get involved to craft all these agreements, to fight the lawsuit, and blah, blah, blah. From your point of view, at the onset of this, why did this need to happen in the first place? Why did the attorneys take up the case against the NAR?
Because there was a lot of money involved. I think this is an incredibly complicated case if you go back to the very original case and what happened. And there was a ton of money awarded in that case. There's a lot more to these agreements than what's being talked about. And I think probably because a lot of it's still being fleshed out. But this is the thing people are talking about. I personally do not really understand the conversation about attorneys and benefiting and all the money we're going to make off of this. I can tell you my office, which is, a big office locally, we've had 0 calls about this. I just don't think that's what's happening. There are other states that require attorneys to be involved in real estate transactions. Maybe it is affecting things more there, but the reality is hardly anybody in Nevada hires or works with an attorney when they're buying or selling a house, which frankly is bananas to me because this is very likely the biggest transaction anybody is going to conduct in their lifetime, the biggest investment they're ever going to make, and you're signing contracts and doing all these very legal things at the advice of your real estate agent who, may have been licensed online through some, program. Who knows?
It could be their second transaction they've ever done.
So I don't foresee it playing out where all these attorneys are, getting a bunch of clients to have to advise on this, at least at a local level. But what I think is important is that it's going to force conversations that probably should have been happening already, right? And I think it's in people's just nature as human beings. They don't want to have difficult conversations with people. They just don't. We've been trained our whole lives. We don't talk about money. We don't talk about politics. We don't talk about religion. And that's true in business, which is really fascinating because it's a business money financial transaction. So these are absolutely conversations that should be had that probably weren't on a regular basis. It's part of a negotiation. I really believe at the end of the day, one of the big benefits of the realtor should be the negotiations they're doing on your behalf with another realtor. And now your commissions are part of the negotiation. And I think from the outside looking in, and I'm probably going to get a lot of flack for this, but there's kind of this monopoly within the real estate world that realtors only want to work with realtors. And I know lots of attorneys, myself included, that have tried to buy houses on their own, sell houses on their own. Listen, I know how to put a contract together. I know how to do a real estate deal. I could not get a call back from somebody to see the house to save my life because they don't want to work with Stephanie Funk, the attorney. They want to work with the realtor that they know, that they trust, that's on their level. And so there needs to be, I think, conversations and transparency in the commissions, who's paid, how they're paid, and it should all be up for negotiations just like every other services in life. And it's just gonna, I think, cause a wider gap though between the good and the bad.
I totally agree. I think that there's this mentality that the way things have been done is the way they should always be done. And there's a need for change, obviously, or this wouldn't be happening. What I'd like you to speak to in closing is why was this a violation of antitrust laws for sellers, for it to not be so transparent?
I don't know the technicalities of like the actual violation portion. That's not what I do. It's not what I specialize in. I have zero desire to do
Zero interest.
Stuff like that. So I frankly have no idea how we got here other than from the outside looking in as someone that buys and sells houses. I think it's something that should be talked about and it's something that should be negotiated because at the end of the day, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money.
There was in the Facebook groups of people losing their minds about it. There was people saying, like a real estate agent will make $100,000, $150,000 on the sale of a luxury property. Should a realtor make more money than a neurosurgeon? And that got people like amped up, right? Because they're like, these people are making so much money. What I think is not obviously that wasn't the point of the lawsuit. The point of the lawsuit was not to attack realtors' income or their motivations or their character. That has all come up afterwards because of the conversations people are having in self-defense. But out there for the consumer listening, I want you to hear all the ways that Stephanie said this benefits you, and a huge one being better negotiation and more transparency. And then for the realtors out there listening, I want you to hear that it doesn't have to be a question of your character, it has to be a question of your value proposition. And how are you gonna illustrate that with enough transparency to the buyer and the seller that you're advising?
And you're controlling how much money you make. I mean, in reality, buyers agents especially, they should have been having these agreements in place to begin with. I mean, you can spend weeks, months, years sometimes showing somebody properties, trying to find that perfect one, ultimately to get, 2%, maybe, everything's controlled by other people, or for them to say, I've decided to work with somebody else and a buddy of mine or my family member just got their real estate license. I mean, you should absolutely be controlling your business from day one and setting the terms of your employment relationship.
I think you're going to get a lot of kudos for adding that little tidbit.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
That's a really good point.
This is not a hobby. This is a profit-making endeavor. That is my favorite thing to remember about all businesses, right? You're not out showing properties for fun. You may enjoy it, but at the end of the day, this is your business and you are doing it to make money and provide for your family, yourself, whatever it is.
I think the other one's going to like that one. Okay, go ahead, Sandy.
Okay. So for our pointer of the month, we wanted to talk about debt management versus down payment. So we've done some information before about the blended rate and knowing your total, all the things that you have in terms of borrowed money, whether that's your car, your student loans, your credit cards, your mortgage, and how do those blend together to make your blended rate. So this month we put together a strategy for move-up buyers who have a lot of equity, but also a lot of debt. So this is just kind of a rough,
which is a lot of people. People have racked up debt over the past couple of years.
Yeah,
we're seeing expensive.
We're seeing this kind of situation. So I just kind of put together some of the things that we're seeing commonly. So in this situation, we're assuming that somebody bought the home 3 to 4 years ago, has a lot of equity now, also has a really stellar interest rate, 2.625. But the monthly payment there that you'll see, the $53.41, that's including their car payment, credit cards, and the other debts that they're having. So their total monthly outflow is over $5,300 per month. They also don't like their house anymore. They're ready for a bigger house, a nicer house. So we could sell their current home, net around $150,000 after closing costs, paying off the old mortgage, all that good stuff, pay off all the debt, put a smaller down payment down on the new property instead of 20%. We're doing 5% down. They're buying a nicer home, and lowering their total monthly expense to $4,100. So that's $1,200 a month more in monthly cash flow that could now be put toward the mortgage to pay it off faster, or invested in
Retirement.
mortgage bonds, mortgage-backed securities.
To bring down interest rates for us.
Yeah.
Hire an attorney to do your estate plan.
There you go. So what could you do with the $1,200 extra a month? So this is just one strategy when you're thinking of doing a move up. If you feel trapped by your low interest rate, let's really look at the whole picture and what else is going on with your finances. In this scenario, they would actually also have an extra $20,000 in reserves to go into their new home and just be in a good position moving forward. So that's just something I urge.
I feel like they would sleep so much better.
Yeah.
They eliminated their debt. They reduced their overall expense. They got into a home that fit their needs better, and now they have an emergency fund. That's huge. You would just go into an online bank, fill out your pre-approval. They tell you to transfer your equity, put it all as your down payment, so you take out the smallest mortgage on the other side.
Yeah, and now you can't qualify for $625. You qualify for $475.
Oh,
because your monthly payment. Yeah, but because you still have those monthly payments that are hurting your debt to income ratio. So
you can't move up, actually.
Yeah, you can move down.
That's insane.
Yeah, so really good strategy. I urge all of you to consider.
What was our success story this time?
The bridge loan.
Oh yeah, that's mine.
Yeah.
So I have a client he had a beautiful house, probably next door to Stephanie, and he downsized. And then he bought a house, but he downsized too much, so they're uncomfortable. So now they want to buy a new house, and it's literally across the street, but it has another bedroom and some more square footage. But he does not want to live through living in a house when it's on the market, and you've got to go down the street to the restaurant every other night because the last minute showing got booked, and you got to get your dogs out and all the stuff and clean up really fast. And also the sellers of the other house were not willing to take a contingent offer. And so we have our cash program, which we've talked about a ton, but we have not talked enough about our bridge loan program, which is easier and cheaper in a lot of situations.
Yeah.
We're helping him tap into $350,000 of equity in the form of a short-term bridge loan so that he can close on the new house, move out, depersonalize that house, have it be presented better for buyers, and hopefully get more money for it in the sale of it because he won't be with his back against the wall, having to sell under a certain deadline. So he's super stoked on it, and it's not a solution that's going to work for everybody because for the bridge loan, you got to qualify for all these payments. Your old mortgage, your new mortgage, and the bridge loan.
Even though you don't pay a bridge loan payment, you have to qualify with it.
Yeah, because we're not predatory lenders. But it is a strategy that could be explored for a lot of scenarios so people can have a more comfortable move, make a more competitive offer, and sell their house for more money.
Yeah, I love it.
Okay, thanks you guys for tuning in. This was a longer one, but it had so much good information. We hope you got a lot out of it. And we'll see you. Oh, Michelle's telling me not to forget. We'll see you at Mortgage and Mimosas if you're a realtor locally. And we'll see you at the Futures Female October 17th. You guys should fly in for it because a lot of these speakers are flying in for it. Thanks, guys.
I can't wait.
Bye, thanks.